My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. If you're watching this channel, there's roughly a 99% chance you've played SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom before. It's arguably the most iconic Nickelodeon game in history, a game that has somehow remained relevant in gaming almost 20 years since it came out, a serious achievement for a licensed game. Released on October 31, 2003, Battle for Bikini Bottom was released for each of the home consoles at the time, but it also had two much less talked about and lauded versions. There was the PC version, which was essentially a minigame collection like a lot of Nick PC games were at the time. And then finally you had the GBA version, which I'll also be covering today. This version of Battle for Bikini Bottom was developed by Vicarious Visions, who I've covered extensively on the channel at this point. Rambler, Legend of the Lost Spatula, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, and Him and Seek had all been released before this game, and they'd also developed Operation Soda in 2004. Their time with Nickelodeon would be ending with this game though, as it was the final Nickelodeon game they developed, moving on to mainly working on Activision titles. The much more memorable home console version was developed by Heavy Iron Studios, who have quite an interesting history. Founded in 2000, Heavy Iron was built to make licensed video games. Their first game based on an animated property was Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, before going on to make Battle for Bikini Bottom, the SpongeBob movie game, and basically every home console game based on Pixar films from 2004 to 2009. After working on an Evil Dead title, THQ came knocking and purchased the studio, seemingly providing financial security. We all know how that really ended though. THQ hit hard times, and early on in these financial struggles, Heavy Iron was seemingly one of the casualties. In 2009, instead of being completely shut down, the studio was granted their freedom and independence from THQ as a cost-cutting measure. This would prove to be a stroke of great luck, as it ensured they wouldn't go down with the ship when THQ finally sank in 2012. Funnily enough, Heavy Iron's first game with their newfound independence was Truth or Square. And impressively, they're still around to this day, but unfortunately have no involvement with the SpongeBob franchise. As you all probably know, in 2020 Battle for Bikini Bottom was remade, however this was developed by Purple Lantern Studios. They're actually working on their own original SpongeBob title tentatively slated for next year, titled The Cosmic Shake. It'll be interesting to see how they fare. The Battle for Bikini Bottom remake is extremely faithful, to the point where it's pretty much the same game that came out in 2003, but obviously much more beautiful in the visual department. Whether Purple Lantern's able to bring something new and exciting to the table remains to be seen. When you look at the reviews for the OG Battle for Bikini Bottom, it's not hard to see why the game has stood the test of time. The home console version averaged a 7.1 review score, which is pretty impressive for a Nickelodeon game, but doesn't really match up with the way the game is discussed. In fact, it has a lower average review score than the SpongeBob movie and the TAC games. The GBA version, while not as critically acclaimed, still impressed. It settled at a handy 6.4 average, which puts it in the upper echelon of Nick handheld games. Battle for Bikini Bottom is a titan when it comes to games based on cartoons. Could it possibly live up to its reputation in 2021? Often the handheld versions of these licensed games are radically different from their flashier console big brothers. Many times they genuinely have very little to do with one another. That's not the case with Battle for Bikini Bottom on GBA. The basic story premise of robots being unleashed into Bikini Bottom by plankton is here, and your goal is still to collect golden spatulas. However, what is naturally different is the gameplay. Not exactly possible to bring a 3D platformer to a handheld back in 2003 unfortunately. Much like Vicarious Visions did with Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, they go the 2D platformer route here, and if you played that game you can immediately tell that this is pretty much a direct follow-up to it. Vicarious Visions seem to have pared back the complexity of SpongeBob's arsenal here though. In Revenge of the Flying Dutchman you had an array of bubble powers, while in Battle for Bikini Bottom your bubble is pretty much just used for attacks. You'll jump and glide with A, and that's about it for the controls. Overall, the movement and platforming is passable. It's a little bit sluggish, but nothing that impedes the experience too much. It's off just enough to have you wishing it wasn't so stiff, but I couldn't complain too much. As I mentioned, the GBA version of Battle for Bikini Bottom retains the golden spatulas mechanic, but unlike the home console version, these aren't scattered around levels locked behind various tasks. These are instead tucked away in corners of the level or require some puzzle solving to gain access to. It's pretty standard platformer stuff. And again, deviating from the home console design, players will need to collect every golden spatula in the game. Each level has 3 of them, and you're unable to move to the next level if you don't have them all in your possession. In addition to the spatulas, you'll see a fair amount of Krabby Patties scattered across levels. Nabbing each of these unlocks a bonus level, which is an on-rails vehicle section like in Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. While mechanics like this are nice to have because they give the regular gameplay a brief break, give some extra focus to the platforming, and they reward the player for being thorough, the execution of the actual bonus level here is really poor. Not only do you have to collect every Krabby Patty in the regular level, but you also need to grab every Krabby Patty in the bonus level to even get a reward. This is just silly. You're not rewarding the player when you do this, and honestly, I'd rather not get the bonus level at all when it's set up like this. Battle for Bikini Bottom on GBA takes Saturday morning sanitization of violence to the next level. Old Saturday morning cartoons weren't allowed to kill humans, so the heroes would usually just destroy robots. Well, here, SpongeBob faces robots, but isn't allowed to kill them. Instead, each of your different avenues of attack with SpongeBob will simply stun the enemies. In reality, this decision was designed as a gameplay mechanic rather than toning down the violence. This game heavily revolves around stunning enemies and then using them as platforms or trampolines. Jumping on their heads will allow you to jump higher, and while they're stunned, you can push them around the level to access various different areas. It gives levels a real puzzle vibe as you try to figure out how to get from A to B. But the most unique aspect of the game is mystery.
Lisa!
Yes, SpongeBob's pet seahorse makes an appearance here. Well, it's actually a lot more than an appearance actually. Mystery is a featured player. In practically every single level, you'll come across her and she has a wealth of different abilities. She'll eat away roadblocks, she moves a bit quicker and jumps a bit higher than SpongeBob. After playing with Mystery for a little bit, you'll quickly realise that this is very reminiscent of using Yoshi in Super Mario World. One of Mystery's greatest uses in the gameplay is jumping with her, then having SpongeBob abandon her midair to get a super duper mega jump. This is ripped straight from arguably the greatest 2D platformer Nintendo ever produced. It goes even further than that though. Mystery can swallow up enemies and spit them out in another location, once again playing a part in the puzzle elements. Then once you run into the Bullet Bill style enemies, it becomes so bleedingly obvious that Vicarious Visions wanted to make their own homage to Super Mario World. It's an inspiration that extends to the level design too. One of my biggest criticisms of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman's GBA release was the annoying, almost open style of levels where you were forced to explore everywhere to find the required items for you to progress to the next level. Battle for Bikini Bottom scales this back a fair bit, instead opting for a style reminiscent of Super Mario World, where levels will often have branching paths. When you first start the game off, levels are entirely linear. It's almost impossible to miss the spatulas and you're essentially just going left to right with some verticality thrown in. It's actually really fun when the game sticks to this. Issues only start cropping up once they get more ambitious with the levels. When they become less linear, they become cumbersome here. You inevitably find yourself having to backtrack to get items you missed and could never have possibly foreseen coming. At one point they introduced locked doors without warning. Unless you're searching every inch of that level, you'll hit this roadblock and you'll be forced to backtrack. In my opinion, backtracking is probably one of the least enjoyable things to throw in a 2D platformer. If you want to do that, just go full Metroidvania. It doesn't work for a pure platformer. I had countless experiences where I was scrolling along, then all of a sudden came to a gap that I couldn't possibly jump over without having a robot to bounce off of. This would then result in me having to backtrack way too far to find a robot. It's just a silly design. The player could never possibly predict this. You're just forcing me to walk around in circles and get progressively less interested in the game. The icing on the cake is that it's very easy to get stuck in levels. Due to the game's puzzle nature, if you push a block incorrectly or destroy the wrong enemy with Mystery, you can quickly find yourself locked in purgatory. It's a real shame that Vicarious Visions shot themselves in the foot here. I think Battle for Bikini Bottom on GBA had real potential to be great. The game already had the robots being used in the platforming and mystery to spice things up. To me, the more open structure of levels and leaning way too far into the puzzles was unnecessary. Ultimately, I find this version of the game hard to recommend. It does so many things right, but when you start encountering frustrating occurrences where the game says, "Tee hee, guess you didn't know that you needed to bring a robot here every 2 minutes," I can't imagine anybody would truly love this game. It's a real shame because I think Battle for Bikini Bottom could have been tacking the power of Juju levels of great. A swing and a miss for the GBA version. Will the home console release fare better?
Wow, that robot looks like Patrick, and its breath seems just as bad.
This day just doesn't seem to be getting any better.
So here we are, the holy grail of Nickelodeon games. Plankton plans to unleash a plague of robots on Bikini Bottom in order to steal the Krabby Patty formula, but an oversight means the robots refuse to obey him. As a result, the robots have decided to try and take over the world on their own, and for some reason, SpongeBob hunting down golden spatulas will save the day. This is SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it's a damn good time. I'd already played the remake before coming into this, so I knew I was going to like it. But having played that version last year, particularly because it's so faithful to the original, has taken the wins out of the original sails a little bit. Additionally, having reviewed Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, it's pretty clear that this game stands on the shoulders of that far more underappreciated title. If you played the original Battle for Bikini Bottom for the first time without any of that context, I can 100% see why it's treated as a masterpiece. The clamouring for a remake is so much clearer now. Essentially, Battle for Bikini Bottom is your standard late 90s, early 2000s collectathon platformer. Your main goal is to collect the golden spatulas that have been spread around Bikini Bottom's various locations, serving the same purpose as stars or jiggies. Some of these will be obtained via typical platforming challenges, but others will require puzzle solving, discovering hidden areas, all of that great 3D platformer stuff. Spatulas aren't the only thing you'll be collecting though. You're immediately introduced to these flower-looking things that the game officially calls shiny objects, creative. These aren't entirely essential on your journey. Many times they'll unlock something like the bungee sections that allow you to obtain another spatula. Additionally, every time you collect a certain amount, you can trade them to Mr. Krabs for a spatula. So while you can technically ignore them, it's a good idea to stock up as you frolic about Bikini Bottom. Then you have Patrick's socks. These are usually put in hard to reach or hidden places. Every time you grab 10, you can take them back to Patrick and exchange them for another spatula. Because of these two additional mechanics, you're actually free to skip some of the spatulas in levels. You need 75 to access the chum bucket and save the day, so the extras from Krabs and Patrick will help. But in reality, it only helps in a very minor way. You only get the slightest bit of leniency here, and you're going to be exploring every single level to get to the end. In that way, it differs from something like Mario 64, where you can easily beat the game without experiencing everything the game has to offer. I think my favourite aspect of Battle for Bikini Bottom, at least when it comes to controls and gameplay stuff, is how smooth the movement is. Controlling SpongeBob is a dream. It might actually be some of my favourite 3D platformer movement from this era of consoles. Jumping works perfectly, combat is decent, it basically polishes up all of the issues with Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. I guess my one negative here is SpongeBob could have used a sprint option. His movement speed is somewhere between a sprint and a walk, which is fine a lot of the time, but painful when you're backtracking or trying to clean up some missing collectibles. Interestingly, SpongeBob isn't the sole star of Battle for Bikini Bottom. Sandy and Patrick both get to tag along for the ride. They play a really big part in the gameplay too, as some spatulas can only be obtained by specific characters and their unique abilities. It's very similar to how Super Mario 64 DS introduced Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi into the fray. You know your gameplay idea is pretty good when Nintendo ends up doing something similar. Characters are changed at bus stops that are scattered about levels. You don't get free reign of the characters though, Only 2 of the 3 characters are ever utilised in each level, but it's still pretty cool. Selfishly, I would have liked to see on-the-fly switching of characters here. Having to find a bus stop because you just discovered you have the wrong character to get a spatula can be quite annoying. Heavy Iron generally does a good job of providing a bus stop exactly when you need it, but there are still plenty of times where the location of a bus stop is just too far away. In addition to these new characters, SpongeBob will learn new bubble abilities as the game progresses, allowing you to return to certain levels and finally nab a spatula that had been teasing you earlier. I think the best thing about this multi-character approach is that they all feel distinct and different. SpongeBob has got his bubble abilities and high jump attack, Patrick is the only character that can throw fruit to solve a plethora of puzzles, and his attacks can't be utilised in mid-air, while Sandy's biggest benefit is that she can glide. I think Sandy is my favourite of the trio. She takes most of the combat strengths of SpongeBob, and when you throw in the glide, she's just a joy to use when traversing levels. It creates all sorts of unique situations. As I touched on, SpongeBob gets upgrades in the form of his bubble abilities. The first of these is the Bubble Bowl. I can only assume this ability was created by Satan himself. This attack/puzzle solving ability sees SpongeBob throw a bowling ball made from a bubble. It can be used to hurt enemies, but you'll mostly use it to activate certain switches and complete puzzles. Aiming this thing is a goddamn nightmare. Even the most basic uses of it are made tough. I pretty much refuse to use it unless absolutely necessary. The last little tweak to the gameplay is the slide sections. Most levels have at least one of these and they control well enough. It does get a bit much when you arrive at the level that is entirely designed around these though. Sliding is a fun transition between 2 parts of a level, but when it's the focal point, the cracks really start to appear. Overall though, Battle for Bikini Bottom is just fun to play. This game isn't perfect, it has a lot of flaws if I'm being honest, but the gameplay just has some intrinsic quality that makes it so satisfying. Running about as SpongeBob feels so good, and it's the reason why I'm optimistic that Purple Lamp will produce something decent with the Cosmic Shake. If they bring the basic controls over to that, it'll be fun to play at an absolute minimum. I think the elephant in the room is the levels. I have a love-hate relationship with almost all of them. Having already played and platinumed the remake, I was well and truly familiar with everything on offer here. My response upon arriving at almost every level in this game was, ugh, not this level again. Levels are quite expansive and always feature multiple areas, and the best part is that almost all of them are iconic locations from the show. Off the top of my head, the SpongeBob's Dream level, which is a really weird addition, is the only level that isn't directly ripped from the show. Getting to explore Jellyfish Fields, Rock Bottom, Kelp Forest, the Mermalair, Goo Lagoon, it's all just so cool if you're a fan of the show. But I found that at best, practically every level had at least one section or area that I despised. At worst, I straight up hated entire levels. Kelp Forest can jump straight in the bin. Hated it on my first playthrough, still hate it now. The Mermalair is tedious to play through because, as I mentioned, the Bubble Bowl sucks. I didn't even bother with the golden spatula linked to guiding this rolling ball along because I was getting PTSD flashbacks. Even when that level isn't using the bubble bowl, it's just not fun. And then there's the Mr. Krabs section of SpongeBob's Dream, which is entirely dedicated to combat. Like the level dedicated to sliding, this exposes that the game isn't made for in-depth combat sections. It's definitely overstepping its limitations here. These levels are why I wish the game was more liberal with the golden spatulas. Super Mario 64 might be the most replayable game of all time, and I think a lot of that has to do with the overabundance of stars. On subsequent playthroughs, your new knowledge of the game allows you to skip over the stuff you disliked, which is super cool. In Battle for Bikini Bottom, you're pretty much forced to re-experience everything again if you're doing a normal playthrough. One quality of life improvement it does have over most of its contemporaries in the 3D platformer genre is its fast travel. So many games, to this day, still mess this up. Battle for Bikini Bottom allows you to fast travel to any location at any time. In addition to this, levels themselves have a pretty extensive fast travel system to their different areas. I think this was some brilliant foresight from Heavy Iron. They realised the game they made lent itself to 100% completing it really well, so they made that experience as seamless as possible. They didn't know it at the time, but these decisions are a large reason why getting all of the trophies or achievements is so enjoyable in the remake. But to get negative again, the end of act boss battles are awful. After grabbing a certain amount of spatulas, a new portion of Bikini Bottom opens up, but not before you slog through a boss battle. These are insanely tedious. The boss's patterns are so basic and easy to dodge, but they last forever and they have so much health that it takes forever to beat. They're not cheap or a complete disaster, but by being so boring and so long, it's a pain to sit through. The last thing I need to discuss is the presentation. Heavy Iron smashed it out of the park here. The visuals are solid. They won't wow the pants off you, but they're an obvious step up from Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, and they're good enough for me. Not every game is going to be tacking the Power of Juju levels of gorgeous. It's really the combination of these solid visuals, the iconic locations, and spot-on sound design that end up making you feel like you're in the show. It's such a cliche line, but Battle for Bikini Bottom makes you feel like you're experiencing an episode of the show. Every time you run into a character, they're voiced, even if they did have to get a sound-alike for Mr. Krabs, and the writing wouldn't be out of place for a Golden Years episode. The only aspect where the presentation really lets itself down is the random bits of dialogue characters spit out while running around. These give the game life in its down moments and helps prevent an all-star brawl situation where the game feels like a library, but they needed more content here. Hearing SpongeBob constantly say his "like a spring breeze" line or his line about pushing buttons was painful by the end.
Sometimes pushing a simple button is the most satisfying. Push, 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 push. Mr. Krabs? What are you doing in Squidward's dream?
Hard time, boy.
Battle for Bikini Bottom is easily the best SpongeBob game so far. I think it definitely owes a lot to Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. That game was very rough around the edges, but so much of the essence of this game started way back there. Is it the best Nickelodeon game though? That's a tough one. The recently released All-Star Brawl, Nick Kart Racers 2, Tak and the Power of Juju's GBA version, and Jet Fusion on the GBA are all pretty strong contenders for that title. We still have plenty more Nickelodeon games to review. In fact, we're still only in 2003 on our chronological journey through their history, so I'm sure more contenders will pop up. So, is it the best Nick game? Maybe not, but is it an extremely fun SpongeBob game that fans of both the show and 3D platformers should experience? Absolutely. It's a bummer the GBA version doesn't reach similar heights. It certainly had the potential, but it just misses the mark with the final product, like most of Vicarious Vision's Nick and Cartoon Network games. Next time we'll be taking a look at Fairly Odd Parents Breaking the Rules. This was the first ever home console Fairly Odd Parents game, and it seems to have been reviewed decently. After a lot of rough releases in a row, it kind of feels like Nickelodeon is hitting their stride in the gaming space now. Additionally, Breaking the Rules also had a GBA game. Enter the Cleft was really fun, so I'm excited to see if this new game builds off of those foundations. To catch those reviews, make sure you're subscribed.